Sarah Martinez had always been small for her age, but what she lacked in height, she made up for in determination. At 24, she stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed less than most of the gear her fellow soldiers carried into combat. The other medics in her unit often joked that she looked more like someone who should be working in a children's hospital than treating wounded warriors in the mountains of Afghanistan. The doubt in their eyes was nothing new to Sarah. She had seen it throughout her military career. From basic training to advanced medical courses, instructors would glance at her slight frame and wonder aloud if she could handle the physical demands of battlefield medicine. Fellow soldiers questioned whether she had the strength to drag a wounded comrade to safety or the mental toughness to perform surgery under enemy fire. But Sarah had something that couldn't be measured by height or weight. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, where survival meant being tough, smart, and resourceful. Her father had abandoned the family when she was 8, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone while working 2 jobs. Sarah learned early that life didn't care about your size or circumstances. What mattered was how you responded when everything went wrong. Her path to the military began in high school when a recruiter visited her school. While other students saw military service as a last resort, Sarah saw it as an opportunity. The Army would pay for her medical training, give her a chance to serve something bigger than herself, and prove that she was more than just a small girl from the barrio. The training had been brutal. Physical fitness standards didn't change based on your size, and Sarah had to work twice as hard as everyone else to meet them. She would wake up at 4 in the morning to run extra miles, spent her weekends in the gym building strength, and studied medical procedures until her eyes burned from exhaustion. While other trainees complained about the difficulty, Sarah embraced it. Every challenge was another chance to prove the doubters wrong. Now 18 months into her deployment in Afghanistan, Sarah was stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Coast Province. The base sat in a valley surrounded by mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Taliban fighters used these mountains as cover, launching attacks on American forces and disappearing back into the rocky terrain like ghosts. The base was home to several hundred soldiers, including a team of Navy SEALs who conducted special operations throughout the region. The SEALs were legends among the regular troops. They moved like shadows, struck their targets with precision, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to survive in impossible situations. But even legends needed medical care, and that's where Sarah came in. The SEALs had been skeptical of her from the beginning. Their previous medic had been a 6-foot-tall former college football player who could carry a wounded SEAL over his shoulder while returning enemy fire. Sarah looked like she would blow away in a strong wind. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez, had even requested a different medic when Sarah was first assigned to support their operations. "No offense, Doc," Rodriguez had said during their first meeting, "but we need someone who can keep up with us out there. Our missions take us into some pretty rough terrain, and if one of my guys goes down, I need to know you can get him out." Sarah had heard variations of this speech dozens of times. She simply nodded and replied, "Chief, give me a chance to show you what I can do. If I can't keep up or do my job, then you can request someone else." "Fair enough." Rodriguez had agreed, though his expression suggested he was already planning to make that request. The first few missions had gone smoothly. The SEALs would insert by helicopter, conduct their operation, and extract without incident. Sarah carried her medical bag, stayed in position, and waited for casualties that never came. She began to wonder if she would ever get the chance to prove herself to these elite warriors. That changed on a Tuesday morning in October, when Rodriguez briefed his team on their next mission. Intelligence had located a high-value Taliban commander in a compound about 20 miles north of the base. The target had been responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces and was planning something big. The SEALs would insert before dawn, capture or kill the commander, and be back at base before breakfast. Sarah listened to the briefing with growing concern. The target compound was located in a valley known for heavy Taliban activity. Recent drone footage showed increased movement in the area, suggesting the enemy was strengthening their positions. The insertion point was a narrow landing zone surrounded by high ground, making it perfect for an ambush. "Chief," Sarah said after the briefing, "the medical intelligence reports show limited evacuation routes from that area. If someone gets wounded, we might have trouble getting them out quickly. Rodriguez looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "Doc, we've been doing this for years. We know how to handle ourselves. Your job is to patch us up if something goes wrong, not to question our tactics." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she spent the rest of the day preparing her medical kit, double-checking her supplies and studying maps of the target area. Something about this mission felt different, and she wanted to be ready for anything. The team consisted of 4 SEALs plus Sarah. Besides Rodriguez, there was Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chen, a communications specialist who could hack into enemy systems and coordinate air support. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Johnson was their explosives expert, capable of breaching any door or clearing any obstacle. The newest member was Petty Officer Second Class Alex Williams, a sniper whose accuracy was legendary throughout the special operations community. As they prepared their gear that evening, Sarah noticed the camaraderie between the SEALs. They joked with each other, shared stories from previous missions, and moved with the confidence that came from years of training and combat experience. But they still treated her like an outsider, someone who was necessary but not really part of the team. "Hey, Doc," Johnson called out as she organized her medical supplies. "You sure you packed enough Band-Aids? Wouldn't want to run out if one of us gets a paper cut." The others laughed, and Sarah forced a smile. She was used to the jokes, but they still stung. These men were about to risk their lives for their country, and all she wanted was to be accepted as someone who would risk hers for them. The helicopter lifted off at 0200 hours, flying low through the darkness to avoid enemy radar. Sarah sat in the back, her medical bag clutched tightly in her lap, watching the landscape pass by through night vision goggles. The mountains looked like sleeping giants, their peaks disappearing into the cloudy sky. In a few hours, those same mountains might be crawling with Taliban fighters looking to kill American soldiers. As they approached the landing zone, Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset. 2 minutes out. Everyone ready?" The SEALs checked their weapons and equipment one final time. Sarah did the same with her medical kit, making sure everything was secure and accessible. In 2 minutes, they would step off the helicopter into unknown danger, and her chance to prove herself would finally come. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and debris, its rotors beating against the thin mountain air. Sarah followed the SEALs out of the aircraft, her boots hitting the rocky ground as the helicopter immediately lifted off and disappeared into the darkness. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of wind whistling through the mountain passes. Rodriguez raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. They crouched in the darkness, listening for any signs of enemy activity. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by steep hills and scattered boulders that could hide an army of Taliban fighters. Sarah's heart pounded as she scanned the area through her night vision goggles, every shadow looking like a potential threat. After several tense minutes, Rodriguez motioned for the team to move out. They formed a tactical formation with Williams taking point, followed by Chen and Johnson, then Rodriguez, with Sarah bringing up the rear. The target compound was 3 miles away through rough terrain, and they needed to reach it before sunrise. The first mile was the most dangerous. They crossed open ground where they would be visible to anyone watching from the surrounding hills. Sarah struggled to keep up with the SEALs' pace, her shorter legs working overtime to match their long strides. Her medical bag, weighing nearly 40 pounds, felt heavier with each step, but she refused to complain or ask them to slow down. Chen periodically stopped to check his communications equipment and scan for enemy radio transmissions. So far, the Taliban seemed unaware of their presence, but that could change in an instant. Johnson kept watch on their flanks, his rifle ready to engage any threats that appeared from the darkness. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the terrain became more treacherous. Loose rocks scattered under their feet, and the path narrowed until they were walking single file along the edge of a steep drop-off. Sarah's legs burned from the exertion, and her lungs struggled with the thin air, but she pressed on. She could hear the SEALs breathing hard too, which made her feel slightly better about her own struggle. Williams, who was leading the patrol, suddenly raised his hand and dropped to one knee. The others immediately followed suit, weapons ready. Sarah's heart raced as she waited for whatever had caught the sniper's attention. Through her night vision goggles, she could see Williams studying something ahead of them through his rifle scope. After what felt like an eternity, he turned back to Rodriguez and made a series of hand signals. 2 guards at the compound entrance. Dogs patrolling the perimeter. More activity than expected. Rodriguez considered this information, then made his decision. They would proceed with the mission, but they needed to move faster. The increased activity suggested their target might be preparing to leave, and they couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. The final approach to the compound took another hour of careful movement. They had to avoid several Taliban patrol routes that Chen identified through intercepted radio communications. The enemy was definitely more active than intelligence had predicted, but the SEALs adapted their plan accordingly. The compound sat in a small valley, surrounded by mud brick walls and guard towers. From their observation position on a hillside overlooking the target, Sarah could see at least a dozen Taliban fighters moving around the buildings. This was supposed to be a small group protecting one high-value target. Instead, it looked like a major Taliban stronghold. Rodriguez studied the compound through his binoculars, counting guards and identifying potential threats. The intelligence had been wrong about more than just the number of enemies. The compound was much larger than expected, with multiple buildings and defensive positions. But they had come too far to turn back now. "Change of plans," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "This is going to be messy. Doc, I need you to stay here and provide overwatch. If things go bad, you'll need to coordinate our evacuation." Sarah wanted to argue. Her job was to be close enough to treat wounded soldiers immediately, not to watch from a safe distance. But she could see the logic in his decision. With so many enemies, casualties were likely, and someone needed to call for help if the mission went wrong. The three SEALs made their way down the hillside, moving like shadows through the darkness. Sarah watched through her scope as they approached the compound walls. Williams found a position where he could cover the others, while Johnson prepared to breach the main gate. Chen monitored enemy communications and coordinated with air support that was standing by in case they needed immediate extraction. The breach went perfectly. Johnson's explosive charge blew open the gate just as Williams eliminated two guards in the towers with precise sniper fire. Rodriguez and Chen rushed through the opening while Johnson provided covering fire. For a moment, it looked like the mission would succeed despite the unexpected complications. Then everything went wrong at once. The explosion had awakened not just the fighters in the compound, but Taliban forces scattered throughout the valley. Sarah watched in horror as muzzle flashes erupted from positions all around the compound. The SEALs were surrounded. "Contact! Contact!" Rodriguez's voice crackled through her radio. "We're taking heavy fire from all directions." "Williams, where are you?" Sarah looked toward the sniper's position, but Williams wasn't responding. Through her scope, she could see his motionless form behind a boulder. He had been hit by return fire while covering his teammates' advance. Chen's voice came through the radio next, strained with pain. "Chief, I'm hit!" "Took one in the leg and my radio is damaged. I can't raise air support." Johnson's voice followed immediately after. "Multiple tangos approaching from the east. I'm running low on ammo." Sarah's medical training kicked in automatically. 3 wounded SEALs, surrounded by enemies with no way to call for help. The evacuation helicopter wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours, and by then, it might be too late. She had 2 choices: stay in her safe position and watch the men die, or do something about it. The decision was easier than she had expected. These men had doubted her abilities, made jokes about her size, and treated her like a burden. But they were also American soldiers who had sworn the same oath she had. They deserved better than to die alone in a Taliban stronghold, while their medic watched from a safe distance. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and started down the hillside. She moved as quickly as she dared through the rocky terrain, using the shadows and scattered boulders for concealment. The sound of gunfire grew louder with each step, punctuated by the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles and the deeper boom of RPG explosions. As she approached Williams' position, she could see that he was still alive but unconscious. A bullet had grazed his head, leaving him with a concussion and a bleeding scalp wound. His sniper rifle lay beside him, still loaded and ready to fire. Sarah quickly assessed his injuries and applied a pressure bandage to stop the bleeding. "Williams, can you hear me?" she whispered urgently. "I need you to wake up. Your team needs covering fire." The sniper's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Doc, what are you doing here? Where's my rifle?" "Right here," Sarah said, helping him into a sitting position. "Chen and Johnson are wounded and Rodriguez is pinned down." "Can you shoot?" Williams tested his vision by looking through his rifle scope. The world was spinning slightly, but he could still make out targets. Yeah, I can shoot. What do you need me to do? Cover me while I get to the others. And stay conscious this time. Sarah left Williams in his position and continued toward the compound. The Taliban fighters were so focused on the SEALs inside the walls that they didn't notice a small figure moving through the darkness behind them. She reached the outer wall just as an RPG exploded against the building where Rodriguez was taking cover. "Chief, this is Doc," she whispered into her radio. "I'm outside the east wall. What's your status?" "Doc, what the hell are you doing down here? I told you to stay in Overwatch." "Williams is conscious and providing sniper support. Now tell me about your wounds." There was a pause, then Rodriguez's voice came back, filled with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. "Johnson's got shrapnel in his shoulder and is losing blood fast. Chen took a round through his thigh and can't walk. I'm okay for now, but we're running out of ammunition and time." Sarah studied the compound wall, looking for a way inside. The Taliban had focused their defenses on the main gate where the SEALs had breached, leaving other sections relatively unguarded. She found a section where the mud brick wall had crumbled slightly, creating handholds that even someone her size could use. Climbing over the wall was terrifying. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness, and she expected to be spotted at any moment. But her small size worked in her favor. Where a larger person might have struggled to find footing, Sarah was able to use tiny gaps between the bricks to pull herself up and over. She dropped silently into the compound courtyard, her heart pounding so loud she was sure the Taliban fighters could hear it. The sound of gunfire was much louder now, echoing off the walls and buildings. She could smell gunpowder, dust, and something else, the metallic scent of blood. Following the sound of American voices, Sarah made her way through the maze of buildings. The Taliban fighters were positioned around the perimeter, firing inward at the SEALs who had taken cover in what appeared to be the main building. She could see muzzle flashes from windows and doorways as both sides exchanged fire. She found Johnson first, crouched behind a concrete barrier with blood soaking through his uniform shirt. Shrapnel from an RPG had torn through his shoulder, and he was growing pale from blood loss. He nearly shot her when she appeared beside him in the darkness. "Jesus Christ, Doc, I almost put a bullet in you," Johnson gasped. "How did you get in here?" "Same way you did, just quieter," Sarah replied, already opening her medical bag. "Let me see that shoulder." Johnson's wound was worse than she had hoped, but not as bad as she had feared. The shrapnel had missed the major arteries, but he was losing blood steadily, and would need surgery to remove all the metal fragments. For now she could stop the bleeding and give him something for the pain. "This is going to hurt," she warned, then quickly packed the wound with gauze and applied a pressure bandage. Johnson gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. "You're going to be okay, but I need you to stay put and keep pressure on this." "What about the others?" Johnson asked, "Working on it. Keep your head down." Sarah made her way to Chen's position, crawling along the base of the wall to avoid being seen by the Taliban fighters. She found the communications specialist lying behind an overturned table, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The bullet had passed through his thigh, fracturing the bone and causing significant bleeding. "Doc, thank God," Chen whispered when he saw her. "I can't feel my foot and I think I'm going into shock." Sarah quickly examined his leg. The bullet had nicked the femoral artery, which explained the blood loss and the pale color of his skin. This was a life-threatening injury that required immediate attention. She applied a tourniquet above the wound to stop the bleeding, then started an IV to replace the fluids he had lost. "You're going to make it." "Chen, but I need to get you out of here soon," she said while working. "Can you still operate your radio?" "The main unit took a bullet, but I've got a backup in my pack. Range is limited, but it might work. Try to raise air support. Tell them we need immediate extraction and medical evacuation." While Chen worked on the radio, Sarah made her way to Rodriguez's position. The team leader had taken cover in a doorway and was systematically picking off Taliban fighters with precise rifle fire. He had several empty magazines beside him and was down to his last few rounds. "Chief, I've treated Johnson and Chen, but we need to get out of here soon," Sarah reported. "Chen's lost a lot of blood and Johnson needs surgery." "I know, Doc, but we're pinned down. There are at least 20 tangos out there, and more arriving every minute. Even if Williams can provide covering fire, we can't carry 2 wounded men through that gauntlet." Sarah studied their situation. The compound had become a death trap, with Taliban fighters controlling all the exits. The SEALs were running out of ammunition, and 2 of them were seriously wounded. In another hour, they would all be dead or captured. But Sarah had noticed something during her crawl through the compound that Rodriguez might have missed. There was a drainage ditch that ran along the back wall, probably used to channel rainwater away from the buildings. It was narrow and partially collapsed, but it might be wide enough for someone small to crawl through. "Chief, I think I found a way out," she said. "There's a drainage tunnel along the back wall. I could crawl through it and come around behind their positions." "Absolutely not. That's suicide, Doc. You'd be outnumbered 20-1 with no backup. I'm not talking about fighting them. I'm talking about creating a distraction while you get the wounded out." Rodriguez looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "What kind of distraction?" Sarah pointed to the ammunition depot that Johnson had identified during their mission planning. It was located in a separate building on the opposite side of the compound from their current position. If someone could get inside and detonate the stored explosives, it would create enough chaos for the SEALs to escape. That building is crawling with tangos. Doc, even if you could get there without being seen, you'd never make it back out. I don't need to make it back out. I just need to give you enough time to get Johnson and Chen to the extraction point. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment. In the darkness, she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. His duty to his men versus his responsibility for the young medic who had volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission there. "Has to be another way," he said finally. "Chief, Chen is going into shock, and Johnson is fighting infection. In 30 minutes, they'll be too weak to move. In an hour, they'll be dead. This is our only chance." The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their conversation. Chen's radio call had worked, but the aircraft were still several minutes away and would have to deal with heavy ground fire when they arrived. The Taliban had brought in anti-aircraft weapons, turning the extraction into an even more dangerous operation. "Air support is inbound," Chen reported weakly. "ETA 5 minutes, but they're reporting heavy ground fire. The LZ is too hot for a landing." Rodriguez made his decision. "Doc, if you're going to do this, you need to move now." "Williams, can you hear me?" The sniper's voice crackled through the radio. "I'm here, Chief. Head's clearing up. I need you to provide covering fire for Doc. She's going to create a distraction." "Copy that." "Doc, I've got eyes on the ammunition building. There are guards at the front entrance, but the back looks clear." Sarah checked her supplies one more time. She had some medical morphine that could be used as an explosive accelerant, along with Johnson's remaining demolition charges. It wouldn't be as effective as a professional job, but it would have to do. "Remember, when that building goes up, you move fast," she told Rodriguez. "Don't wait for me. Get Johnson and Chen to the extraction point." "Doc?" Rodriguez grabbed her arm as she prepared to leave. "What you're doing? It's the bravest thing I've ever seen. If we make it out of this, I owe you more than just an apology." Sarah smiled in the darkness. "Just make sure you tell everyone back at base that the little medic from LA kept up with the big bad SEALs. I'll do more than that. I'll recommend you for the Silver Star." Sarah crawled toward the drainage tunnel, leaving the 3 SEALs to prepare for their escape. Behind her, she could hear Rodriguez coordinating with Williams and checking on the wounded men. Ahead lay a narrow, dark passage that would either lead to their salvation or her death. The tunnel was worse than she had imagined. It was partially filled with debris and standing water, forcing her to army crawl through mud and garbage. The smell was overwhelming, and she had to fight back nausea as she made her way through the darkness. Several times she had to stop and clear away rubble that blocked her path. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she emerged behind the ammunition building. The Taliban fighters were still focused on the main battle, giving her a clear path to the back entrance. She could hear voices inside, guards discussing the battle and making plans to reinforce their positions. Sarah attached Johnson's demolition charges to the building's support pillars, then added her morphine vials as accelerant. The resulting explosion wouldn't just destroy the ammunition, it would level half the compound and create enough confusion for the SEALs to escape. As she prepared to detonate the charges, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. All the doubts, all the questions about whether she was strong enough or tough enough to serve with elite warriors had led to this. She wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but she was here when it mattered most. Sarah crouched behind the ammunition building, her finger hovering over the detonator. Through the walls, she could hear Taliban fighters moving crates of weapons and ammunition, preparing for a prolonged battle. They had no idea that in 30 seconds their stronghold would become a crater. She activated her radio one final time. "Chief, this is Doc. Charges are set." Give me 60 seconds, then move for the extraction point. Doc, wait. Rodriguez's voice came through the static. Williams spotted a clear path along the north wall. You might be able to make it out. Sarah looked toward the north wall. It was possible, but it would require perfect timing and a lot of luck. More importantly, it might compromise the mission. If she tried to escape and was spotted, the Taliban would realize what was happening and could stop the SEALs' evacuation. Negative, Chief. Too risky. Just get our guys home. She didn't wait for a response. Sarah pressed the detonator and ran toward the drainage tunnel as fast as her legs could carry her. Behind her, Johnson's carefully placed charges ignited the morphine accelerant, which in turn detonated nearly 2 tons of Taliban ammunition. The explosion was bigger than anyone had anticipated. The ammunition building didn't just explode, it vaporized, taking 2 adjacent structures with it. The blast wave knocked Sarah to the ground and left her ears ringing, but she forced herself to keep moving. The tunnel entrance was only 20 yards away. The Taliban fighters reacted exactly as she had hoped. Shouting in confusion and panic, they ran toward the explosion site, believing they were under attack by a much larger American force. The systematic defense of the compound collapsed into chaos as fighters abandoned their positions to help with casualties and fight. The fires spreading through the complex, Sarah reached the tunnel entrance and dove inside just as the secondary explosions began. The Taliban had been storing rocket-propelled grenades and mortar rounds in the same building as their small arms ammunition. Each blast sent shockwaves through the compound, bringing down walls and creating more confusion. Crawling through the tunnel was even harder this time. The explosions had loosened debris from the walls, and water was pouring in from broken pipes above. Several times Sarah had to stop and dig her way through collapsed sections, her hands bleeding from the sharp rocks and twisted metal. When she finally emerged near the outer wall, the entire compound was in flames. Taliban fighters were running in all directions, some trying to fight the fires, others searching for the American force they believed had attacked them. In the chaos, no one noticed a small figure in American camouflage climbing over the wall. Sarah made her way back to the hillside where Williams had been positioned, following the route she had memorized during their insertion. The sniper was gone, which meant Rodriguez had successfully evacuated the team. She could hear helicopters in the distance, the extraction aircraft arriving to pick up the SEALs. But as she climbed higher up the hillside, Sarah realized she had a problem. The extraction point was on the opposite side of the valley, nearly 2 miles away through enemy territory. The Taliban were spreading out from the compound, searching for the Americans they knew were responsible for the attack. Soon the entire valley would be crawling with hostile forces. Sarah checked her supplies. She had her sidearm with 2 magazines, a small amount of medical supplies, and her survival kit. It wasn't much for a 2-mile journey through hostile territory, but it would have to do. The alternative was to surrender or die, and neither was acceptable. She started moving toward the extraction point, staying in the shadows and using the terrain for concealment. The valley was filled with the sound of helicopters, gunfire, and shouting voices. American aircraft were providing air support for the extraction, keeping the Taliban fighters pinned down while the SEALs were evacuated. After an hour of careful movement, Sarah reached a ridgeline that overlooked the extraction point. She could see the helicopter landing zone below, illuminated by the aircraft's floodlights. But she also saw something that made her heart sink. Taliban fighters were moving to surround the area. The SEALs had made it to the extraction point, but they were about to be trapped again. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see Rodriguez, Johnson, and Chen in the landing zone, along with Williams, who appeared to be walking under his own power. The extraction helicopters were circling overhead, but they couldn't land while the area was under fire. The SEALs were trapped in the open with limited ammunition and 2 wounded men. Sarah studied the situation, looking for a way to help. The Taliban fighters were advancing from 3 directions, but they were moving cautiously, unsure of how many Americans they were facing. If she could create another distraction, it might give the helicopters enough time to complete the extraction. She still had one more surprise in her survival kit, a white phosphorus signaling grenade that was designed to create a bright, visible marker for rescue aircraft. But white phosphorus burned extremely hot and could be used as a weapon if necessary. If she could get close enough to the Taliban positions, she might be able to disrupt their advance. The plan was risky, but Sarah had come too far to give up now. She worked her way down the hillside, moving parallel to the Taliban advance. Her small size allowed her to use cover that wouldn't hide a larger person, and her medical training had taught her to move quietly through difficult terrain. She reached a position about 50 yards behind the lead Taliban group, close enough to hear them talking as they planned their attack. They were confident that they had trapped the Americans and were discussing whether to take prisoners or kill everyone on sight. Sarah listened to their conversation, using the Arabic she had learned during her deployment to understand their tactics. The Taliban commander was splitting his forces, sending one group to attack from the east while another approached from the west. The SEALs would be caught in a crossfire with no way to escape. Sarah realized she had one chance to disrupt their plan before it was too late. She pulled the pin on the white phosphorus grenade and threw it into the middle of the Taliban group. The device exploded with a brilliant white flash, burning at over 5,000 degrees and creating a cloud of thick smoke. The fighters scattered in panic, believing they were under attack by American forces. But Sarah's position had been compromised by the explosion. Taliban fighters were now aware that an American was behind their lines, and they began searching for her. She had perhaps 5 minutes before they organized a systematic hunt that would eventually find her. She activated her radio, hoping the SEALs could hear her transmission. "Chief, this is Doc. I'm behind enemy lines west of your position. I've disrupted their advance, but you need to extract now. The helicopters have maybe 5 minutes before they regroup." Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. "Doc, where are you?" "We're not leaving without you." "Negative, Chief. Get Johnson and Chen out of here." "They need medical attention." "Doc, that's a direct order." "Hold your position and we'll come get you." Sarah smiled despite everything. Even now, Rodriguez was trying to take care of his team, including the medic who had proven herself in the most dangerous way possible. But she knew the tactical situation better than anyone. If the SEALs tried to rescue her, they would all die in the attempt. "Chief, remember what you said about recommending me for the Silver Star? Make sure they spell my name right. It's Sarah Martinez from East Los Angeles, California. And tell them that size doesn't matter when it counts." She turned off her radio before Rodriguez could respond. The Taliban fighters were getting closer, and she needed to focus on survival. Sarah found a position among some large rocks and prepared to make her last stand. She had 14 rounds left for her sidearm and one emergency flare that might blind attackers long enough for her to change positions. Below in the valley, she could see the extraction helicopters finally landing. The SEALs were being loaded aboard, with Johnson and Chen on stretchers and Williams helping Rodriguez coordinate the evacuation. In a few minutes, they would be safe, flying back to base where they could receive proper medical care. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction despite her desperate situation. She had done her job. She had kept the team alive and gotten them home safely. The fact that she might not make it home herself was irrelevant. This was what she had signed up for when she took the oath to serve her country and protect her fellow soldiers. The first Taliban fighter appeared among the rocks about 30 yards away, moving carefully and checking every possible hiding spot. Sarah waited until he was close enough to guarantee a hit, then took her shot. The fighter dropped, but his death cry alerted the others to her position. More fighters began converging on her location, firing wildly into the rocks and forcing her to keep her head down. Sarah counted at least 6 different muzzle flashes, which meant she was outnumbered and outgunned. But she had chosen her position well, and the rocks provided good cover from multiple directions. Sarah crouched behind the boulder, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around her. The Taliban fighters were closing in from multiple directions, their voices echoing through the valley as they coordinated their attack. She could hear their boots crunching on loose gravel as they moved closer to her position. Through a gap in the rocks, she caught a glimpse of the extraction helicopters lifting off from the valley floor. The SEALs were safe. Rodriguez, Johnson, Chen, and Williams were finally heading home. The mission had been successful even if it cost her life. But as she watched the aircraft climb into the night sky, something unexpected happened. Instead of flying away toward the base, one of the helicopters banked sharply and began circling back toward her position. Sarah could see the door gunner scanning the hillside with night vision equipment, searching for her location. The pilot's voice crackled through her radio, which she had forgotten to turn off. "Doc, this is Rescue 1. We see your muzzle flashes. Can you mark your position?" Sarah stared at the radio in disbelief. The extraction team was risking their lives to come back for her, even though the landing zone was compromised and crawling with enemy fighters. She keyed the microphone with shaking hands. Rescue 1 negative. Area is too hot for extraction. Return to base. Doc, Chief Rodriguez sends his regards. He says no SEAL gets left behind, and that includes stubborn medics from Los Angeles. Mark your position. Despite everything, Sarah found herself laughing, even from inside a helicopter. Rodriguez was still trying to take care of his team. She pulled out her emergency flare and held it ready, but hesitated. Using the flare would mark her position for the rescue helicopter, but it would also reveal her location to every Taliban fighter in the area. A burst of automatic weapons fire inches from her head made the decision for her. Sarah activated the flare and threw it as far as she could from her current position. The bright red light illuminated the entire hillside, showing at least a dozen Taliban fighters converging on the rocks where she was hiding. The helicopter immediately dove toward the flare's location, its door gunners laying down suppressing fire on the Taliban positions. But Sarah was trapped between the advancing fighters and a steep drop-off that fell away into darkness. There was nowhere for the helicopter to land and no way for her to reach a safer extraction point. Rescue 1, I can't reach you, Sarah radioed. The LZ is blocked by enemy fighters. Doc, we're going to try something. When I give the word, you need to move toward the cliff edge. Trust us. Sarah looked at the cliff edge with growing horror. It was at least 100-foot drop to the valley floor below, with jagged rocks and scattered boulders waiting at the bottom. But the Taliban fighters were only yards away now, and she was down to her last few rounds of ammunition. The helicopter pilot positioned his aircraft just below the cliff edge, hovering in the updrafts that rose from the valley floor. It was an incredibly dangerous maneuver that required perfect timing and exceptional flying skills. One mistake would send the helicopter crashing into the rocks below. Doc, on my mark, you need to jump. We'll catch you. Jump off a cliff in the darkness toward a helicopter she could barely see. Sarah had done many dangerous things in her military career, but this seemed impossible even by her standards. She looked back at the advancing Taliban fighters, then at the cliff edge, then made her choice. Mark, the pilot called. Sarah sprinted toward the cliff edge, bullets whining past her head from the Taliban fighters who had finally spotted her. She reached the precipice and leaped into the darkness without hesitation, trusting her life to a pilot she had never met and a crew chief she couldn't even see. For a terrifying moment, she fell through empty air with the valley floor rushing up to meet her. Then strong hands grabbed her arms and shoulders, hauling her into the helicopter's cargo bay. The crew chief and door gunner had caught her in midair, pulling her to safety just as the aircraft banked away from the cliff face. Sarah lay on the helicopter floor, gasping for breath and unable to believe she was still alive. The crew chief, a young sergeant with kind eyes, was checking her for injuries while the door gunner continued to watch for threats from below. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. Sarah did a quick self-assessment. Cuts and bruises from crawling through the drainage tunnel, singed hair from the white phosphorus explosion, and muscles that felt like they had been hit by a truck, but nothing that wouldn't heal. "I'm okay," she shouted back. "How are the others?" "Johnson and Chen are stable. Williams has a concussion, but he'll be fine. And Chief Rodriguez has been raising hell on the radio for the past hour, demanding that we come back for you." As the helicopter flew toward the base, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. The adrenaline that had kept her going for the past several hours was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and shaking. She closed her eyes and tried to process everything that had happened. When she opened them again, the crew chief was offering her a bottle of water and a field ration. "Thought you might be hungry, ma'am. Word is you've been having quite an adventure tonight." Sarah accepted the water gratefully and took a long drink. "Just doing my job." "Ma'am, with respect, your job description doesn't include single-handedly destroying Taliban strongholds and jumping off cliffs. That was something else entirely." Through the helicopter's windows, Sarah could see the lights of forward operating Base Chapman, growing larger in the distance. In a few minutes, she would be back to safety, back to the routine of treating minor injuries and dealing with the doubts of soldiers who questioned whether she belonged in a combat zone. But something had changed during the mission. She had proven to herself and to the SEALs that courage and determination mattered more than size or strength. The girl from East Los Angeles who had been too small for everything had just rescued 3 of America's elite warriors. The helicopter touched down on the base's landing pad, where a crowd of medical personnel was waiting to treat the wounded SEALs. Sarah climbed out of the aircraft and was immediately surrounded by doctors and nurses who wanted to check her for injuries. But before anyone could examine her, Rodriguez appeared at her side. The SEAL team leader looked exhausted and relieved, with bandages on his hands from where he had dragged Johnson and Chen to the extraction point. He stared at Sarah for a long moment as if trying to find the right words. "Doc, I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I was wrong about you. Hell, we were all wrong about you." Sarah was too tired for speeches. "Chief, you don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job." "No, Doc, your job was to provide medical support. What you did tonight, that was heroism. You saved all our lives, and you did it without hesitation." Other soldiers had gathered around them, drawn by the news of the dramatic rescue mission. Sarah could see the looks of amazement and respect on their faces as they realized what she had accomplished. For the first time since arriving at the base, she felt like she truly belonged. "Chief, how are Johnson and Chen?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "Johnson's in surgery to remove the shrapnel, but the doctors say he'll make a full recovery. Chen needed blood transfusions, but he's stable. Williams is being treated for his concussion. They're all going to be fine, thanks to you." As the medical team finally succeeded in dragging Sarah away for her own examination, she heard Rodriguez talking to the base commander who had arrived to debrief the mission. Even from a distance, she could hear fragments of his report. "Sir, I've never seen anything like it. She crawled through enemy fire to treat our wounded, then destroyed their ammunition depot single-handedly. When we were trapped at the extraction point, she created a diversion that saved all our lives. I'm recommending her for the Silver Star, and I'll put anyone who disagrees on report." The base commander, a colonel who had spent 30 years in the Army, looked impressed. "Rodriguez, in 3 decades of military service, I've seen a lot of brave soldiers. But what you're describing sounds almost impossible. Sir, I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it. That little medic has more courage than soldiers twice her size. The Taliban threw everything they had at us tonight, and she never backed down." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the base's main auditorium, wearing her dress uniform and feeling more nervous than she had during the firefight that night in the Taliban compound. The auditorium was packed with soldiers, officers, and visiting dignitaries who had come to witness the medal ceremony. News of her actions had spread throughout the military, making her something of a legend among combat medics and special operations forces. The base commander, now promoted to brigadier general, stood at the podium reading from her official citation. His voice carried clearly through the auditorium as he described the events of that October night, though the official version was much more sanitized than what had actually happened. For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy, the general read, "Specialist Sarah Martinez distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct while serving as a combat medic attached to a Navy SEAL team conducting operations in hostile territory. Sarah's parents had flown in from Los Angeles for the ceremony, sitting in the front row with expressions of pride and amazement. Her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to support the family after her father left, kept wiping tears from her eyes. Her younger brother, now a senior in high school, stared at his sister with newfound respect. Rodriguez sat with the other SEALs who had participated in the mission. Johnson's shoulder had healed completely, and he had returned to active duty with his team. Chen walked with a slight limp, but was otherwise fully recovered. Williams showed no lasting effects from his concussion and had been promoted to Petty Officer First Class. The general continued reading the citation, describing how Sarah had treated wounded soldiers under fire, destroyed enemy positions, and coordinated the team's evacuation. But the dry official language couldn't capture the reality of what had happened that night. The fear, the adrenaline, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Her actions directly resulted in the successful completion of the mission and the survival of all team members, the general concluded. Specialist Martinez's extraordinary heroism and selfless service are in keeping with the finest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. As Sarah stepped forward to receive the Silver Star, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the streets of East Los Angeles to the mountains of Afghanistan, she had faced doubt and skepticism at every step. People had questioned whether someone her size could handle the physical demands of military service, whether she had the courage to face combat, whether she deserved to serve alongside elite warriors. The general pinned the Silver Star to her uniform, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor in combat. Only 2 medals ranked higher: the Distinguished Service Cross and the Medal of Honor. For a combat medic who had never planned to be a hero, it was an almost unimaginable honor. But as she stood at attention while the auditorium erupted in applause, Sarah wasn't thinking about medals or recognition. She was thinking about the 3 SEALs who had made it home safely that night, about the families who didn't have to receive notification that their loved ones had died in a foreign land. After the ceremony, there was a reception where Sarah was introduced to military leaders, journalists, and politicians who wanted to shake her hand and hear her story. Everyone wanted to know how someone so small had accomplished something so extraordinary. Sarah answered their questions politely, but she was growing tired of being treated like a curiosity. Rodriguez rescued her from a particularly persistent reporter and led her outside to a quiet spot behind the auditorium. The October air was crisp and clear, with stars visible in the desert sky above the base. "How are you holding up, Doc?" he asked. "It's overwhelming," Sarah admitted. "I never expected any of this attention. I was just trying to do my job. Doc, what you did that night was way beyond the call of duty. You earned every bit of recognition you're getting." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching aircraft taking off from the base's runway. "Chief, can I ask you something? Why did you really request a different medic when I was first assigned to your team?" Rodriguez looked embarrassed. "Honestly, I was scared. Not of the enemy, but of losing someone under my command. You look so young and small, and I thought the job would be too much for you. I didn't want to be responsible for getting you killed. And now I know that courage doesn't come in a particular size. You taught me that the person inside matters more than what they look like on the outside. I was an idiot for judging you based on your appearance." A group of other SEALs approached them, led by Johnson and Chen. Both men looked healthy and strong, showing no signs of the injuries they had sustained during the mission. Williams was with them, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. "Doc, we wanted to give you something," Johnson said, presenting the package. "It's a tradition in our team to give special gifts to people who save our lives." Sarah unwrapped the package to find a custom-made combat knife with her name engraved on the blade. Below her name was an inscription: "Size doesn't matter when it counts, Rescue Team Alpha." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "But you guys don't owe me anything." "Doc, we owe you everything," Chen replied. "Johnson and I wouldn't be here without you. Our families wouldn't have husbands and fathers. That's a debt we can never repay. Besides," Williams added with a grin, "now you're officially part of the team. That knife means you're always welcome with any SEAL unit, anywhere in the world." As Sarah looked at the knife and the inscription, she realized that she had found something she had been searching for her entire life: acceptance and respect from people whose opinions truly mattered. These men had seen her at her worst and her best, had trusted her with their lives, and had been willing to risk everything to bring her home. The next morning, Sarah returned to her regular duties at the base medical facility. But something had changed in the way other soldiers looked at her. Where once she had seen doubt and skepticism, now she saw respect and admiration. The story of the little medic who had rescued 3 SEALs had spread throughout the base, inspiring other soldiers who had faced their own doubts about their abilities. A young female soldier approached her during sick call, a private first class who couldn't have been more than 19 years old. Like Sarah, she was small for a soldier, and Sarah could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Ma'am, I heard about what you did," the young soldier said nervously. "I wanted to ask, how do you handle it when people say you're too small for the job?" Sarah looked at the young woman and saw herself 2 years earlier, scared, determined, and desperate to prove herself. "What's your name, soldier?" "Private First Class Maria Santos, ma'am. I'm with the military police." "Well, Santos, let me tell you something. There will always be people who think you're too small, too weak, or not tough enough. They'll judge you based on what they see instead of who you are inside. But the only opinion that matters is your own." "But what if they're right? What if I really am too small for this?" Sarah smiled and touched the silver star on her uniform. "Santos, 6 months ago, 3 Navy SEALs thought the same thing about me. They requested a different medic because they didn't think I could handle the job. But when it mattered, when their lives were on the line, size didn't matter. What mattered was training, courage, and determination. So you're saying I should ignore what people think? I'm saying you should prove them wrong. Every single day, with every task you perform, show them that you belong here. Eventually, they'll stop seeing a small woman and start seeing a soldier. But more importantly, You'll see yourself as someone who can handle anything this job throws at you. Santos left the medical facility with a straighter posture and more confidence in her step. Sarah watched her go, remembering her own struggles with self-doubt and the long journey to acceptance. That evening, Sarah received a video call from her family back in Los Angeles. Her mother appeared on the screen, still emotional from the medal ceremony. "Mia, I'm so proud of you," her mother said in Spanish. "When you told me you were joining the army, I was scared. I thought they would chew you up and spit you out. But look at you now, a hero." "Mama, I'm not a hero. I'm just a soldier doing her job. Sarah, don't you understand? You've shown everyone that our family, our neighborhood, can produce someone special. The kids around here look up to you now. They see that someone like them can achieve great things." Sarah's younger brother appeared on the screen, grinning widely. "Sis, you're famous. There was an article about you in the LA Times, and my friends at school keep asking if I'm really related to the medic who saved the Navy SEALs." As Sarah talked with her family, she realized that her actions had affected more than just the 3 SEALs she had rescued. She had become a symbol of possibility for young people who had been told they were too small, too weak, or not good enough. If the little girl from East Los Angeles could earn the Silver Star, maybe they could achieve their dreams too. The call ended with promises to visit home soon and hugs sent across thousands of miles. Sarah sat in her small room on the base looking at the Silver Star medal and the knife from the SEALs. They were tangible reminders of a night that had changed everything, not just for her but for everyone who heard the story. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of the base settling down for the night. Helicopters returning from missions, soldiers talking as they walked between buildings, the distant hum of generators providing power to the facility. It was the sound of Americans serving their country in a dangerous place, far from home and family. Sarah thought about the young private who had asked her about dealing with doubt. Tomorrow there would be others, soldiers who questioned their abilities, who wondered if they belonged, who needed someone to tell them that size and strength weren't the only measures of a warrior's worth. She had found her purpose, not just as a medic who treated wounded soldiers, but as an example of what was possible when someone refused to let other people's expectations define their limits. The girl who had been too small for everything had become exactly the right size for the job that mattered most.